our own Jake Punturi tossed out a top 3 realistic wide receiver targets for the Pittsburgh Steelers. You can find that at si.com/NFL/Steelers. Those targets, a bit shocking. Names that we have not mentioned yet, and names that, while they would be nice, maybe the word realistic isn't as realistic as we want it to be. Those names: Jahan Dotson, Washington Commanders; Jacobe Meyers out of the Las Vegas Raiders; and then KJ Osborne out of the Minnesota Vikings. You read that story? You saw those names?
New England Patriot.
New England Patriots. Excuse me. New England, freshly signed to the New England Patriots. You look at all 3 of those names. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. Look, I mean, so these are somewhat long shots, but I think every receiver option for the Steelers at this point is a long shot. So if you think they need to add an impact player, like, they're going to have to make a bold move to get one. So that's why I don't, really hate any of these names on this list. Jahan Dotson, I think, would be really interesting. I think he's got some speed. He's a little bit bigger too. I really like what he could bring there. I think the only problem is, like, Jacoby Meyers had a couple good seasons, but he's kind of getting up there in age. Dotson's still relatively young. Like, Dotson should be like the kind of number 1 guy on this list. Like, this is the most intriguing one to me. I think that just in a vacuum, like, it would be a guy who could be kind of a game changer for them right away, and maybe even be a long-term option. He's been really good and looking like a pretty bona fide number 2 receiver. Like, you split up his numbers from the past 2 seasons, and I feel like that kind of production is absolutely perfect for what the Steelers would need. It'd be a trade that would, I don't know, it'd probably take you a 2nd-round pick or something, I feel like, at this point. I feel like the Commanders are real happy with what they have, and you bring in a rookie quarterback, I feel like giving away weapons is usually not the move, especially with a guy who's just as young as, like, he's only been in the league for 2 years. 2 years. Yeah, 2 years, 2022 and 2023. So, like, the Steelers would have to make a real strong offer to pry Dotson away from the Commanders, I would think.
Yeah, I'm looking at it as a 3rd-round minimum that you're giving up for John, and then probably some, 3rd round and like a 3rd round next year, or a 4th round next year, maybe I don't know, something like a Kenny Pickett deal where once he plays X amount of snaps, it becomes a 2nd-round pick. But I think Jahan Dotson is a dude that makes a ton of sense for the Steelers. If it wasn't for the trade compensation, he's young, he's still on a rookie deal, he's got a ton of upside. I don't think he's even come close to reaching that upside. He's got all the speed that you're looking for. He can play inside and outside. He's a number 2 without threatening a number 1. That's what the Steelers are looking for. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's an interesting name, to say the least. Is it a realistic name? I don't know right now. I think it's going to be a lot tougher to pry him away from Washington than maybe people want to say. Jacoby Meyers is an interesting one, but I don't think it's interesting right now. I think that it'll be a lot tougher to get him from the Raiders today than it will be come week 8, when the Raiders stink and their season's coming to an end, and Gardner Minshew isn't playing the way that they hoped that he played, or Aiden O'Connell's getting benched, or however they make that happen. I could see Jacoby Meyers being a name that's on the trading block that the Raiders look at to say, look, let's see what we could get. Let's add some draft capital right now. At that point, I could see the Steelers making a move. I'm not upset about Jacoby Meyers. I don't know how much money he costs, but I don't anticipate that he's a guy that is going to cost you $20 million a year. KJ Osborne, I thought, was a very realistic name in free agency. That being said, he just signed to the New England Patriots. So if that's the case, Juju Smith-Schuster is a much more realistic name than KJ Osborne, because they're just not going to give up KJ Osborne after just signing him and adding a quarterback to say that this is how they're going about things. And they're just, great deal, we'll move on. I don't think that one fits the bill either.
Yeah, I agree with you on Osborne. Like, I don't think he's going anywhere. I don't think the Patriots would be willing to part with a guy that they literally just signed and haven't seen anything of yet.
Yeah, so, not one snap.
But I think I think the same thing about Meyers too. Like, these are guys who, like, Osborne to a lesser extent, but I still think, like, Meyers definitely falls into this range of, yeah, we're going to be on a bad team. Like, maybe we'll eventually want to blow it up if things don't look like they're heading in the right direction. It's not like Jacoby Meyers is cheap either. Like, I think he's on like a $30 million deal. And he's supposed to make, like, his salary skyrockets next year up to like $10.5 million after like $5 million this year. So if you're
Yeah.
the Raiders, if you're just not interested in investing that type of money into a guy who's really not on the same timeline as you, because he's also 28 years old, and I feel like the Raiders, I don't know, and the Raiders in some ways, like, they have a bunch of stars, but also, a first year full time head coach, right? Like Antonio Pierce,
Mm-hmm.
um, in his first full year, like, you're going to need a quarterback eventually. You're going to have to hit the reset button eventually, and I just can't imagine that Jacoby Meyers is part of that future long term. So I agree. Like, week 8, somewhere around the trade deadline, the Raiders looking a little desperate. They just want to offload this salary so they can kind of, like I said, hit the reset button, start over again. I think Jacoby Meyers is, like I said, all these guys are, realistic only up to a certain extent. But I think of this list, it seems like Jacoby Meyers might be the most immediately realistic guy of any of them.
I think that's an important conversation to have, is if the Steelers don't get a wide receiver right now, if they don't pull something off before the end of training camp or the start of the season, I wouldn't rule out them not pulling something off come week 8, of them seeing, hey, yeah, we have guys in Calvin Austin and Scotty Miller and Van Jefferson, but we need a little bit something more to put us over the edge so that we can make a playoff push and head into the playoffs with a really strong offense. That's when a wide receiver trade could still go down. That's still certainly on the table for them. If the Steelers don't get something done now, which I still think they do, I look at the Steelers as a team that's going to push for right now, for training camp during the dead time. I'm telling you, it's honeymoon season, which means that they're going to make a trade. While this is how they operate, people, you could say it, you could ask Steven, you could ask Nick. It happens every time. Without fail, it happens every single time. I expect that to happen. I could see week 7, week 8, the Steelers going out and saying, screw it, we need a wideout. And Jacoby Meyer fits that bill. There's probably a couple more guys that would fit that bill as well, but a trade deadline move to keep them afloat, to make sure that they make a really strong playoff push, would be another realistic timeline for when I would say a major trade goes down for the Steelers.
Yeah, and I think there will be a pretty significant sense of urgency during that first half of the season prior to the bye week and things like that. Like, I don't think the Steelers have to dominate, but they have to win pretty convincingly during that first half of the schedule and win a lot in order to make the second half bearable. We haven't done a schedule talk in a long time, but, like, mind that back half is still pretty brutal. So any adjustments that you're going to have to make to power your way through that second half to make sure that what you've got going is sustainable, I think they're going to have to be proactive. I think they're going to have to think ahead a little bit. They're going to have to look at what they're doing right now and say, okay, we're going to have to be 50% better in the second half. If we're happy with where we're at weeks 1 through 8, we're going to have to be twice as good or whatever in the second half in order to keep things above board, to stay afloat in such a tough schedule, such a tough division. So I'm absolutely with you. I'm not counting out a wide receiver trade later in the season at all, but I am also on board with you. I think something happens before training camp. Like, I don't think they're going to sit on their hands for all of June and July and just say, maybe this all comes together and maybe it doesn't. I think they're going to be active and aggressive in making sure that they have explored every avenue to making this team as good as possible. I think they're very interested in putting all of their eggs, not all their eggs, but a lot of their eggs in this basket this year.
That's where what we'll find out is they will be aggressive. Just like you said, they will call every avenue and see what all of their options are. It really could come down to if any of their options are realistic or if any of them pan out and play out in a scenario where they can make a trade happen. If they don't, that's when they'll go to the next step, which is them. But I agree. It's going to go, option A will be to find something right now. Maybe that something doesn't work out, and that's when we'll start talking about option B, which will be more towards the season.